Test 1 2. Ooh, that was too loud. Test 1 2. Hey, what's up everyone, Danny here, and in this video I'm going to show you a budget gaming PC I put together for roughly $250. For this build, I took on 2 additional challenges alongside the budget. The first was that I had to buy all the parts online, so no local deals. I had to buy parts that any person in the US could have access to. Basically, all my transactions had to be through the internet and had to go through shipping. I wanted to do this because in past build videos, people have complained whenever I got really good local deals that their local market is not as good. So we're taking away any advantage that I might have from that. The second challenge was that I only had 1 day to buy all the parts. I wanted to see how hard this would be to accomplish given a very limited amount of time, and this is going to drastically reduce any chances of me getting super good deals on all the parts. This kind of emulates people who have all their money lined up, ready to go, and they want to buy the parts right away. So let's see how I did. So here are the parts I bought before I unboxed them, and the nice thing about doing this was that I never had to leave my house. Everything was just a few clicks away and shipped directly to my front door. I'll go through each of the components one by one, tell you the cost, and why I chose them. First, we'll start with how I chose the CPU and platform. Pretty much anything that requires DDR4 memory was off the table in this price range because I would have had to spend so much on the processor, motherboard, and RAM alone that I wouldn't have had enough left for the graphics card, especially one that would balance well with these parts. You know, online listings I was seeing for Ryzen and Coffee Lake CPUs, even for the lower end like Ryzen 3 and i3s, were all in the ballpark of $100 for the CPU alone. So you add in the motherboard and the RAM and we're well over half the budget, so I had to go back a few generations. And this eliminated AMD since I didn't want to use anything from them older than Ryzen. But on Intel's side, Kaby Lake, Skylake, and Haswell, those were all too expensive in terms of i3s and i5s. You know, they were going for way more than they were worth. So I kept going down the list and landed on Sweet 1155 socket, Sandy, and Ivy Bridge, where components are super cheap because they're really popular in office machines, which are often liquidated in masses, most of the time ending up in recycling centers or in the hands of individuals who will tear them down and part them out for profit. On OfferUp, I was able to get an i5 2500 that was listed for $35 before shipping, but I offered the seller $33 shipped, and he accepted. This CPU launched 8 years ago with 4 cores, no hyperthreading, a 3.3 GHz stock clock capable of boosting up to 3.7, and I'm hopefully going to show how relevant this can still be in 2019. I did also look for i7 2600s, but those were still fetching around $90 to $100 online, and this is for the non-K version, and I just don't see the value at that price point. I paired the i5 with the micro ATX motherboard found in Dell Optiplex 790s that are super inexpensive and very common on eBay. I found a buy it now listing for $12.99, but all eBay transactions are taxed to where I live, unfortunately, so the final price came out to $14.33, but at least I got free shipping. This didn't come with an IO shield, but I was completely fine with that because I didn't want to spend another $5 to $10 just for the shield when the motherboard itself was less than $15. There are a few quirks about this motherboard that you need to be aware of, especially if these are some things that may be deal breakers for you. The first is that all the fan headers are proprietary, but there are a couple things that you can do to fix this. If you're using a standard cooler, you can splice your wires and rearrange them such that they match Dell's layout, or you can buy an adapter on eBay for like $2 that does that for you, or you can buy an Optiplex cooler which has the right connector, which is what I did since I needed a cooler anyways, and it only cost me $8 after tax and free shipping on eBay. Next, there's no audio header for your front panel audio jack, so you're gonna have to use the jack in the back I/O or use like a USB adapter if you want to connect your headphones. For under $15, this motherboard does what I need it to do and is easily replaceable down the line, something that you should definitely consider when buying older parts. It's more convenient to replace a $15 OEM motherboard that's plentiful than a $50 to $60 branded one that's scarce. For memory, I found someone listing 12GB of Hynix RAM on OfferUp for only $1, and they listed it like this so that their post would stand out when sorted by lowest price, but it wasn't really $1. They added in their description saying to make an offer, and their clickbait worked though because I clicked on it, and I ended up offering $20 with $5 shipping, and they accepted. When I was looking for RAM, I made sure to get more than 8GB because DDR3 is getting pretty cheap, and I'm starting to see some of the newer games that I've added to my benchmarking suite utilize over 8 gigs. So whether it was 12 or 16GB, it didn't really matter to me. This just happened to be the deal I came across that was the best gigabyte per dollar. For the power supply, I went with EVGA B-Stock's 600 watt white label. It's not modular, it has mesh wraps that do a pretty bad job at hiding the ketchup and mustard, and the mesh doesn't even go all the way up to the connector, but for $19.99 out the door, it's pretty hard to beat. I buy these pretty often and have nothing but great experiences with them, and if anything does go wrong, EVGA does provide a 1-year warranty, so that's not bad for 20 bucks. For the graphics card, I didn't want anything too old, and I was pretty surprised when I saw that there was a decent amount of cards on OfferUp that were from the last couple of generations. I was finding a lot of RX 480s and GTX 1060s in the $100 to $120 price range, which is pretty awesome as these will let you play any games that you want comfortably at 1080p. I saw an ad for an XFX RX 480, the one with the hard swap fans, and it was the 8GB model, listed for only $99. I offered slightly lower at $90 for the card and $12 for shipping, and the seller accepted. I'm really happy about this purchase because at $102 out the door, the price to performance will be phenomenal. For storage, I picked up a 500GB 7200 RPM Hitachi Desk Star on eBay for $12.96 after tax. There's nothing special about this, it's just your typical 3.5-inch mechanical drive. I do wish I could have bought an SSD, but I was really strict about my $250 budget and I just didn't have enough left over after getting all the other components. But if you were doing this build and you weren't restricted on buying only online or like a time limit, I'm sure you could find a way to fit an SSD in there, and I would highly recommend it. The gaming performance that you're going to see later on won't really be affected by an SSD, but it would give you some quality of life improvements due to the faster boot up, read, and write speeds. And now for the case, which I knew going used would be out of the question because the cost for a typical person to ship one can easily be more than the case is worth due to the size. So I usually go brand new from online retailers no matter what the build budget is because they can offer shipping for free or at a lower price. Newegg is usually my go-to for cases, so I went there and I sorted by price, and the lowest price one that I could find that had decent ratings was the DIY PC MA01-R for just over $22 after tax and free shipping. It's a micro ATX tower and is similar in terms of features and layout to most bargain bin cases. You know, you have your top mounted power supply, shallow depth behind the motherboard tray, cable management is a bit harder, you've got breakaway expansion port brackets, you know, it uses acrylic instead of tempered glass for anything transparent, and there's no trace of RGB lighting on it at all. But for 22 bucks, I wasn't expecting any of that, and I intentionally did not want to see through the side panel because the inside is pretty ugly. The motherboard is pretty hideous, and the stock Optiplex cooler and plain RAM was nothing to show off to the world. But hey, this case does come with 2 pre-installed fans, so that's a plus. And that was it. I was done. I met my goal of purchasing all the parts online and all within a single day. So here's the cost summary of everything, and for the grand total, I slid in a decent amount below $250. Once I got all the parts in, which took about a week, I started building. Cable management is not the best with this case as you're working in pretty confined spaces, so you may get pretty frustrated even if you're a seasoned builder. But you could also just choose to ignore it because no one's going to see it once the side panel is on anyways. You know, there's no window. But here it is, the final build. The system booted up without issue the first time, so that was a sigh of relief. On boot up, because of the motherboard we're using, there's a list of alerts that pop up. This is because we're missing some of the connectors from the stock Optiplex case, but none of them are showstoppers, you just have to press F1 to continue. So the PC is good to go, time to look at the performance. There was no overclock on the CPU, but I did overclock the RX 480 to 1350MHz on the core and 2250MHz on the memory. Let's start with the synthetic benchmarks so you can get some numbers to compare side by side, either your own build or some other builds you may have seen online. I ran the newly released Cinebench R20 CPU benchmark and scored 952 on the multi-core and 255 on the single core. This is a pretty new benchmark, so it may be hard to get a good feel on what the scores mean relative to other hardware we've seen. So I did run the R15 benchmark as well and scored 454 on the multi-core and 123 on the single core. For reference, these scores are pretty comparable to the Ryzen 3 1200, with the R20 scores being more accurate for current and future processors. Next is Unigine Superposition, which I ran on the high 1080p preset and scored 5879. In Standard Firestrike, I scored 10,307, and for Firestrike Extreme, which is in 1440p, I scored 5,720. In the DirectX 12 TimeSpy test, I scored 3,862. And keep in mind that these overall 3D Mark scores are a result of both the CPU and GPU, but each of the summary screens I've shown do break it down by the standalone graphics and CPU physics scores if you are interested in that. For the games benchmarked, I was aiming for an average of 60 FPS at 1080p. We'll start off first with Apex Legends. I was running at max settings, but unfortunately, no matter what I did, I could not get the Riva Tuner overlay to show up in the game, which is really frustrating because I've seen other people post videos of it working, so I know that it should work, but I had zero luck trying to get it to show up after doing all the tricks in the book. So I had to resolve this issue by using the AMD Adrenalin software to monitor, and because of this, I couldn't get the hard averages 1 and 0.1% lows. For manually reviewing my captured footage though, I was seeing averages between 75 to 80 FPS, and I didn't see it dip much below 60 FPS if I had to guesstimate a 1% low, and it'd be impossible to determine a 0.1% low by eye. Very solid performance though on what's quickly becoming one of the most popular games of this year. Next up is Fortnite, and I was seeing the same overlay issues here. Riva Tuner just did not want to work with Fortnite either, even though I've gotten it to work in plenty of my previous benchmarks, so again I had to go with AMD Adrenalin. At max epic settings, I was getting what seemed to be an average of 60 FPS with some brief moments where it dipped barely below that into the high 50s. Last on the Battle Royale list is PUBG, and I had it running at the preset high settings and was averaging 82 FPS with the 1% and 0.1% lows at 34 and 30 respectively. Moving on, we have Assassin's Creed Odyssey, a game that is very taxing on most systems. The graphics are pretty top notch and you're playing in a super huge open world, sprawling with NPCs and tons of things happening all around you, so it'll bring a lot of systems to their knees. On the medium preset, I saw an average of 40 FPS followed by 30 and 26 for the 1% and 0.1% lows. I didn't see much improvement by lowering the graphics settings, so I wasn't able to reach the average 60 FPS sweet spot, but being an offline single player RPG, I still found it to be very playable at this frame rate. In Anthem, at their preset medium settings, the system just barely missed that 60 FPS average mark, but it was really close. This is still super playable though, since this isn't a really quick twitch shooter type of game and the movement in-game is actually on the slower side. And I was seeing an average of 58 FPS with a 30 for the 1% low and 21 for the 0.1% low. In Battlefield 5, I was running on the high preset and was comfortably playing above 60 FPS for the most part, averaging 70 FPS with a 1% low of 45 and a 0.1 low of 33. The last benchmark was for Metro Exodus, and I used the benchmarking tool with custom settings, which I'll show on the screen now. But running that, I saw 40, 24, and 20 for the average 1% and 0.1% lows. So overall, I'm really happy with this build. It's a little bit janky and it's got some quirks like, you gotta press F1 every time you boot up. But I feel like the performance without a doubt delivers for the price. In most of the tests, the i5-2500 was fully being utilized and it was sometimes being a slight bottleneck, but I didn't really have an issue with that because the gaming performance was really solid. With that said, there's always room for improvements, and here are some of the first upgrades I do. If I had $300 to spend, I would have definitely bought an SSD and then spent another $20 or so on the case, which would get you something a lot nicer with more emphasis on cable management and more space to work in. And I think with around $350, a Ryzen 3 or Coffee Lake i3 build would have been within reach, and that would provide a much better upgrade path than what I got. The thing about that is though, you can always keep adding more money to get the next best thing or like the next newer part or take that next step up, but it's really up to you to decide where you want to draw the line. But I personally had a lot of fun with this build and I'm really proud of what I was able to come up with given the target budget and the constraints of only buying online and within a time limit. I want to ask you all though, what do you think of this build? Is it too janky for you? Is it way too old? Or is it right up your alley? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll tell you right now though that this is not the end of this build. I'm actually going to be killing two birds with one stone with this system. I'm going to take this build slightly modified and compete against some other tech tubers in a competition we have coming up. I might have made a risky decision with what I did with it, but we'll see what happens. So expect to see this PC again in the near future. But other than that, I just want to say thank you so much as always for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope you all enjoyed and found this either helpful or entertaining. And I will see you all in the comments as well as in the next video. Bye.